Hammerella Thundersmoke is live right now on Indiegogo. You can help us expand the Gods and Gears universe by clicking the link below. But now, on with the show.
Give us any chance, we'll take it. Read us any rules, we'll break it. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Doing it our way.
Hey homies, what's up? Ryan Wynn here with another very special episode of Late Night INKS. Now, normally we will do an ink along where you can download an illustration that I have provided in the description below, and then you can ink along either digitally or print it up and ink it traditionally. But tonight, since we're celebrating the release of the Hammerella, or the launch, I should say, of the Hammerella Indiegogo campaign, I wanted to do something special and show you this cover that we got going, and we're going to be looking at the different tools and techniques that it took to put into it. So what you see me using here is a deleter nib, and deleter comes from Japan. It's a manga nib, manga of course being Japanese for comics, so it's a comic nib, so you can use it for all kinds of things. Now this is a metal stamped nib that then is rolled, and you dip it in the ink and it collects ink, and as you expand the tongs, the ink flows down onto the paper that you have cut open with the nib. That's right. Using a nib is sort of like tattooing the paper. You're carving into it and the ink is being pulled down into the fibrous threads. So it's a little bit different of a feel than when you use a brush. In a brush, you're literally just brushing the ink on. You're laying it on and the fibers of the paper are soaking the ink off of the brush. But the pen and nib, they cut right into it. So it's actually even a noisy process. But this was not recorded with the audio and the video at the same time. I recorded this. I had music that I cannot share on YouTube playing, so I decided to do audio afterwards. But we are going to have some music provided for us in this episode by Institute 91. I've discovered their music recently thanks to Spencer Desmond and Jeff Elkins, creators of City of Rot, which is also live on Indiegogo for a few more days. I'll provide a link below for that. So what they did was they, well, I guess they're friends with Institute 91, but they contacted them to create an album just for their Indiegogo project. And not that that's a single original idea, but it was a really good creative mix of that project, which is a post-apocalyptic zombie tale, but it's told through a biker who has been betrayed by his biker bar. So anyways, enough of pitching their projects and whatnot. Let's talk about inking with the nib. So what I like to do, if I'm going to use a variety of tools, I use the nib for faces and hands, and this is because I like those to be as crisp and tight as possible. All of the acting is done with our hands and faces in drawings or on stage, TV, film, whatever. We do so much descriptive characterization with our hands and our faces that it's real important that that stuff translates properly, especially in a line art medium like this. Now, you'll see here I'm doing, I've switched over to the brush. So the brush is going to give me the opportunity for a little bit more line variety. You can bear down and get a thicker line. I mean, obviously you can use a bigger nib if you want to get with the equal with the brush size. But if you're just using the standard tools like a Hunt 102 or deleter nib, then when you want to go heavier, you'll want to go with the brush. Now remember, none of these are hard and fast rules. Just because I recommend something doesn't mean that, if you do something different, it's less or anything like that. I've gone through so many different phases, and excuse me, in the years that I've done this, there was a time period where I refused to use any type of marker, sort of a brush and nib purist, and part of that was that markers really weren't all that great at the time. This was back before Pitt pens, and we had Sakura microns that were pretty decent, and they worked in a pinch. But when you're working at deadline speed, you need maximum tool efficiency, and you can get every line that you need with a nib and a brush, and they can last you all year, and all you have to do is get new ink, which is only a few bucks a jar. So it actually ends up being much cheaper in the long run. There were so many people when I was younger, they would say, oh, I can't afford the brushes, but they would be buying new brush markers and markers every couple months, and I would buy, back then it was a Winsor & Newton, talking 20 years ago. It was a Winsor & Newton Series 7, and those are still great brushes, at least I'm told. I haven't bought one in years. The quality started suffering about 10, 20 years ago. It really started going down with them, but I've been told that the quality is back up. If you guys use a Winsor & Newton, let me know. If you use a Raphael, let me know. If you use a different type of brush, there's all sorts of brushes out there. But the Raphael has been the most consistent since I started using it. Rarely do I get a bad one. It was the first company I really trusted ordering their brushes online when I needed to. I do like to go into a art store if possible, but nowadays that's can be a little more difficult. But even despite pandemics and things going on like that, some of us just don't have local art stores. Anyways, this is some of my favorite kind of stuff to do is big line work like this. I used to be a lot snootier, where I would be really picky about those imperfections. There may have even been a time early on where I would use a French curve, and I recommend doing that stuff early on, because you want the line to be clean. You don't necessarily need it to be done by your hand perfectly. If you need a big curve line or a series of lines like that, I always recommend start out with the French curve. Make it look good, and then try to mimic that. Practice mimicking that with your hand. And practice. Like, that's the thing with inking. You want to not just be inking pieces. You want to be practicing your brush strokes, and you want to fill up blank pages and scrap paper with nib work and brush work, and just practice getting the shapes that you use and the types of lines. And that's just like running drills like an athlete. You got to think about it like that. You got to run the drills, and then when it's time for game day, you got all the moves. So here's something I don't think we've done yet on the channel, is to use a stencil. We may have done like 1 or 2 circles now that I think about it. Like, I think on Etragon the Demon we did that a few weeks ago, but we don't often talk about it. I should probably do a special video, because there are specific techniques that are really helpful, and it depends on what type of template you're using versus what type of pen or marker you're using, because each pen and marker has got a different shape profile. You can see the Pitt pen here has the little black felt tip, and then the metal barrel, and then the plastic barrel that expands. But some of them have a longer metal barrel, some of them have a longer felt area, and that can work against you depending on how thick your template is, things like that. So that's one of the things too that can be frustrating when you're first starting. So I'll try to do an episode that breaks those down. So what we have here is what's become the term. The term has become spotting the blacks. Now, spotting the blacks originally in the old Marvel Comics handbook was the inker figuring out where the black spots go. And then over the years, it sort of became the term for just filling in where the black spaces go that the penciler has already decided, or that the head inker has decided, and you as the assistant will go in and spot the blacks. You will just go in and just fill in black area. Now, this was my reward to myself as an inker. I set this piece up in pencils to be really fun to ink. I have a lot of fun using these type of brush lines and then creating the patterns that we're going to create for the smoke, where I did a lot of the heavy work in pencil, of course, but or the thinking in pencil, so that I could just go in with the brush and basically just trace and create shapes and create energy. And yeah, this was sort of my treat. That's why I saved it for the end. Reward to myself, or if I did a good enough job on the rest, I got to be in a super good mood and be really happy when I got to this part. And that doesn't always work out, but luckily it did for this piece. And this was when I started thinking this should be the cover. And then when I was talking to Peter Smetti about it, he was like, oh, well, I just assumed this was the cover. And so did Dean Kotz. He assumed this was the cover, and all sorts of stuff like that. So this just became the cover. And we're going to do an inking video running lapse episode that will be a time-lapse episode of the coloring of the cover. It's fairly simple, but I think I'm going to slow it down and talk about the process, and even maybe not just do time lapse, but actually show the individual layers and why I made those choices. Not even necessarily to teach you. I mean, I guess it'll be a way to teach you, but I'm still learning all of this stuff too. You know, I've been coloring and painting for years, but my focus for 20 years was just inking. So to really start to get into coloring constantly and consistently, I feel like if I talk about it and break it down, I'll learn from my mistakes, you can learn from my mistakes, and we can learn from what I did right too. Alright, so just like hair, I break it up into bigger chunks. I don't just start off and do all the individual lines. So when you see something like this, like say by Walter Simonson or you know, somebody that does a lot of Bernie Wrightson, somebody like that, somebody that does a lot of brush rendering and stuff like that, they don't always start off just, you don't dive in and like, oh, here's all these crazy brush patterns. You set yourself up with these bigger chunks. You break it down like that, and you're going to end up doing that like when it's mountains or forests or trees. No matter what you end up drawing, illustrating into your illustrations or your comic book work, you're going to always have to think about that big thing first, then put in the details. You know, break everything down, and especially hair. That's why I use hair for this example. You can probably look and see why I said that, because it's almost broken down into like giant locks of smoke, just like locks of hair, and then I'll go in and do the individual strands, which in this case it's not hair, it's energetic black smoke flowing out. So here we're going to break out that template again. This was a on the fly thing. I thought I was going to do some sort of brushy outline and maybe some Kirby crackle, which I've done on some of the other images, but at the moment I was like, nope, I think this needs to be this needs to lean into the design element, and it just needs to be a bolder circle on the outside edge. And then go in and spot those blacks. Now you'll notice I'm moving a little faster than real time. I was trying to find a balance doing the time lapse, but making it comfortable to watch, because time lapse with the spinning paper, it's always really hard on the eyes. Now early on making videos, I thought it was cool no matter, just to watch people work or to post my own work like that, and very quickly I realized I don't like watching all the spinning, and it can't be that comfortable on everyone else's eyes. So if you got this far into the video, let me know down below if this was a decent way to do a long form inking video that's still comfortable to watch. You can see the techniques I'm using, but it's not spinning around and making you nauseous and stuff like that. And if you've got any solutions, anything like that you'd like to offer, I'm always open. You guys always have such great ideas. Now we are going to get back to the ink-alongs next week. This has been kind of a crazy week putting the campaign together. I knew it was going to be crazy and it was going to be stressful, but whenever you get into new things, you've always got to be ready for all that stuff you don't know. Like you say, you know it's going to be difficult, but there's going to be a bunch of hurdles and things that you don't know, and life's going to throw a bunch of curveballs at you. And so we had to delay a week, and I thought I was going to lose a lot of momentum with people and a lot of goodwill from people who had wanted me to, we had scheduled to be on their shows, and people were looking forward to backing the project, and then a bunch of things outside of the project went wrong, a bunch of the things inside the project went wrong, and we kind of had to pull back and regroup, and I think it's all for the better now. Everyone has come out and been so supportive. It's been overwhelming. It's been fantastic. I can't thank you guys enough. And then the campaign just became sharper and crisper, and the thing is about building those perfect perks and getting the page just right. And now that I've done it, I look forward to doing more. It reminded me a lot of going to conventions early on, which hopefully you youngins out there will get to experience going as an artist and being on that side of the table, because it can be really interesting and really fun. And I don't mean in a don't look at it like you're sitting in some throne looking for praise. You're there to entertain people. So you're there to win them over. So you have to, you know, figure out ways to make your table inviting and fun and not intimidating, and things have to be clear. If something's for sale, there's a price and things like that, but you don't want it to feel like a store that you're shoving, you know, a salesman in front of them. So opening up the Indiegogo page, it reminded me a lot of that. And in that sense, it was kind of fun because marketing is its own art form, and it can be kind of scary and frustrating and intimidating. But so can inking with a brush, and I figured out how to do that. So I was like, okay, so I can figure out how to do other things too, other creative endeavors. At least I lie to myself and tell myself that. But if I tell myself that, then I get the courage to try it. So you can see now, get back to the art here, you can see now I've gone into the chunks of smoke that we've broken up earlier, and now I'm breaking it up into black and gray shapes. And by gray, I don't mean I'm actually using gray wash or gray ink. I mean I'm breaking up the space into white and black lines, which creates a grain effect. And what that does, what do I say? Everything, what's our goal for everything? Whenever I ask a question in this video, what's the answer? To create dimension. That's why we do it. So the black, the white, and the gray, use those three values to create dimension. And obviously you can create more values by creating more variety of gray, which can be done with cross-hatching, which can be done with line weights. You can see here that on the far left, you can feel the weight of that smoke on the bottom is heavier because of those lines. It's almost black again. But that's also sort of in the background of that plume. So as the plume comes around to the front, you have these heavier black lines. But then the parts I'm inking now, where those heavy black lines sort of transition and start breaking up into the white. And then I'll sort of repeat those patterns. Now that's I want to sort of demystify this stuff, because some of this these brush patterns can be so intimidating at first, and really all it is all it is years of practice. But all at its simplest form, it's just a series of lines that you're putting next to each other. Some of them curve one way, some of them curve another, some of them get thin here and thick there, and that's why you want to run those drills, like I said. And we'll do a video just on that. I've done some of the early ink along videos. We did warm-ups and stuff like that, and you can take those warm-ups and expand on them. But we can actually develop some drills. When I worked with Danny Mickey years ago, that's where I started out, and he had a series of drills that you ran as an inker that were designed to create muscle memory, and not just designed to create muscle memory, but designed to teach you basically all the fundamental lines that you need. Like, here's how you do these smooth lines for female forms, water, fluid cloth, things like that. Here's how you do bouncy lines for rendering. Here's how you do gritty lines for textures on rocks or leaves or trees or things like that. So you run these drills, and then when you get into something like this, you can have more fun with it instead of it being a big stress mess of how do I do these lines? Are these lines going to be clean enough? Because you want the brush experience to be as fluid as possible. And by doing this sort of work too, you also allow yourself a lot of room for mistakes. Not only you can always white out. Don't be afraid of that. A lot of creators don't like to use whiteout. It's another thing. I went through a phase where it was when I was working at Joe Weem's studio. We both went through this phase of try to use as little whiteout as possible. So if something was black with white line work on it, we would outline all the black stuff and leave the white as the white of the paper, where a lot of times you'll go in and just use your whiteout pen to do white lines over that. Like, say it's a black piece of sheet metal with rivets and seam lines in it, you would kind of just paint that. You would do it, you would ink it normal with a black pen, and then you would brush on a light layer of black, like one coat of some watered down ink, so you could still kind of see the lines through it. And then you'll take your white pen or your white ink, either Pro White or a gel pen, whatever you use these days. Acrylic paint works really nicely over ink too. And you would then create those white lines over the black. But we got into this purest state of, just pen, just nib, no marker, and whiteout was only for mistakes. Where years before and 4 years before that, working at Danny Mickey's studio, it was, white was a part of the palette almost. And especially when we were working on Spawn, everything was so organic that even the instructions from McFarlane were, when the nib accidentally catches on the paper and flicks a little ink, just leave it, unless it's right on somebody's face or something, which I have stories about, but that's for another day. And, so we would leave those things, and we would splatter a little extra white or black here and there, and we would use the whiteout markers to create separate textures that you really couldn't get with by just doing black and leaving the white. So it was a big part of your repertoire, your toolbox, your arsenal, your ammunition, was to use that whiteout. And I still use the Presto whiteout pens to this day. 20 years in, those are still one of my favorite things. You can get really good with those. They're basically a giant ballpoint marker of fluid white ink. And if you practice enough with that, again, using scrap paper and sketchbooks and running drills, you practice enough with that pen, you start to learn how you can get really thin lines. Danny Mickey was so good with it when he was doing stuff over Joe Quesada that people thought he was using some sort of like razor technique, where you can take a razor blade or X-Acto knife and drag it across your black ink and get these really fine white lines where the blade scratches up the ink. But no, it was his absolute masterful control of this giant, Pentel Presto whiteout marker that's designed for office use. But that's what you got to do. You gotta figure out what works for you, and then you gotta master it. So back to talking about our ink-alongs. I'm not sure what we're gonna do yet next week. I'm going to pick another winner from our email campaign, and if you're not familiar with that, what that is I was asking people to sign up with the link below onto the Hammerella email list, and you'll get an email back from us once you do that, asking you to suggest a character. And when you do that, I get a list from my assistant that's just a list of the characters that were recommended. So I don't know who recommended them, so I'm not picking favorites. Even up to the day of filming the video and posting the video, I do not know who chose it. That way it's purely the fun of choosing the character, and I am absolutely not accused of having favorites or anything like that. So we've given away 3 already. We did a Tom Selleck as Magnum PI, which was really fun. We did a Solomon Kane, which was a character I've always wanted to get into. It's my cohort on Gods and Gears. It's Dean Kotz. Solomon Kane is one of his favorite characters. But like I said in the video, I always avoid those pointy hats. I didn't like the pointy hat on the character, so I avoided him. And then we did Etragon the Demon last week, and that was really fun too. That's one of my favorite Kirby characters. And like a lot of my favorite characters, I don't really like a lot of the stories or books he's been in, like a Doctor Strange or a Dr. Fate. Some of these cosmic-y, mystical characters, I really, really like them, but I've only ever liked a few things they're in. So Etragon's one of those. I do have favorite titles. Cosmic Odyssey I mentioned in the video. and his original series. I did hear that some of the modern ones have been kind of fun and cool from some friends of mine, so I may check those out. Now, if you're interested in studying the works that have inspired me to do this kind of work, it's going to be people like I mentioned earlier, Bernie Wrightston, which I have a cool video to make about Bernie Wrightston. I've got a cool signature from him on a cool portfolio that will lead to a cool story. And who else did I mention? Bernie Wrightston. Oh, Walter Simonson, who's still doing amazing Thor Ragnarok stories, but not Thor from the Marvel Universe. This is purely based on all the Norwegian mythology. And he specifically does this sort of heavy rendering and line work, and it's also very reminiscent of Toppi, Toppi. So check them out, Wrightston, Toppi, and I just brain farted on the third one I mentioned. Oh man. So, anyways, what we're doing here, breaking out the ruler. I don't think we've broken out a ruler in here. I really, really like these grid rulers. You can line up the edge of the paper to make it square. You can line it up on, if you're doing buildings, you can square up lines. You can create angles that run through diagonally through the squares. So you can line things up at certain angles. It's just, I don't know, I absolutely love those. Oh, Wrightston, Toppi, and, oh, wait, I almost remembered. Never mind. Stinky brain farts. So anyways, another technique you can do is use a template. I used a French curve to create these long curved lines so that they were really clean. And then I went over them freehand. So they have a freehand vibe, but since there was a really clean line to follow, I was able to do that. And then we sign it and we look over it. And normally if this was an ink along, I'd tell you to sign along. Maybe I should post this and see if you guys want to ink along. You know what? I'm going to post the inks to the pencils below. And if you guys want to take it on, go ahead. This all of a sudden just became an ink along right at the last minute. So we'll see what you guys, if any of you take on that challenge. Make sure to go back Hammerella. Right now it is live on Indiegogo. And check out City of Rot in the link below, all of that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. And until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and take it easy.
Stupid cat.